Well, the bow drill is a perfect example. I always say that the bow drill is my greatest teacher because it's a challenging. The men think because they're men, they should be able to do it, right? It's just inherently like, okay, fire maker. And sometimes they get so mad that they throw their whole kit, they'll throw it across the camp. Okay, well, that's fine to do that, right? So it's the bow drill's teaching, right? I'm just the facilitator. The bow drill is doing the work, right? It's doing the deep work. It's a way to grow. It's a way to let go of stuff.
My guest today is Mark Wienert, a man who spent the better part of his life living, teaching, and thinking deeply about survival, both in the wilderness and as a human being. Mark, now 72, has been immersed in wilderness skills and nature-based teachings for over 30 years, working with countless people that have come to the outdoors looking for something and often finding more than what they expected. What makes Mark compelling isn't just his technical side of survival, such as fire, shelter, tracking, and navigation, but the way he frames the wilderness as a mirror for human psychology. Subjects like fear, ego, confidence, and purpose. His work sits at a rare intersection of physical survival and inner awareness, where learning how to live off the land can become a way of learning how to live with ourselves. Today's conversation isn't just about skills or stories. It's about how extended time in nature reshapes the way we see risk, comfort, identity, and what we actually need to survive. I wanted to talk with Mark to understand how decades of wilderness teachings have shaped his worldview and what he thinks modern people are really searching for when they step away from civilization and into the wild. My guest today is Mark Wienert, founder, lead instructor, and director of Lifesong Wilderness Adventures, a premier wilderness survival and nature awareness school that he established in 1994. For more than 3 decades, Mark has trained adults and teens in advanced wilderness survival, bushcraft, animal and human tracking, and deep nature awareness, blending survival skills with a philosophy rooted in confidence, self-reliance, and connection to the natural world. He received his advanced training under legendary survival instructor Tom Brown Jr., specializing in tracking and primitive survival skills. He has worked with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife conducting salmon and steelhead surveys, and he served on the Coos County, Oregon Search and Rescue Team, specializing in man tracking and wilderness survival. Mark is also a guide, outfitter, recognized professional, and has consulted on major survival television productions, including Disney Channel's Adventure Crazy and the internationally known series Man vs. Wild. I have a quote here from one of the directors of Man vs. Wild. Wienert has proven to be one of the best, the only survival expert I've worked with that could deliver! Exclamation point. Through Lifesong's different camps, including one called First Circle Camp and the most extreme survival challenge called The Edge, Mark has guided thousands of people through transformative wilderness experiences designed to build not just survival skills, but resilience, clarity, and personal confidence. The purpose of today's interview is to understand Mark's thinking, probe his experiences, and to hopefully gain insight into how he sees things from a human wilderness perspective and why it's important. Thank you for being with me today, Mark.
Thank you, Seraphin.
Okay, so what first drew you into the wilderness and survival training? Was there a defining moment in your life?
Well, yeah. So there was in relationship to the business end of it or being a teacher. I was in my 40s when that happened. I had a logging business at the time, and my kids were just getting out of high school and off to college. And so as they were moving on in their lives, I had the thought that I would too, and maybe get into something that was more akin to what I enjoyed doing when I wasn't working. And also my body was in pretty good shape. I hadn't gotten hurt in the logging industry. And it's just some minor bruises and bumps. And so I started thinking about that question. What would I like to do for the rest of my life? What are my interests? There was a book by a teacher in Medford at the college there in Medford, Oregon. And he wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Making a Living. And it was a class that he had that the book went along with. And I just found the book in a bookstore, huge book, big, thick book, lots of really interesting quotes. Joseph Campbell was premiered in that book a lot. His quotes. Campbell wrote a lot of really interesting books about the human experience. I think how we all kind of think about the hero, right? So the book kind of pulled and drew that out of you. You may not want it to be a hero, but it kind of amplified those ideas. And it asked a lot of hard questions, and it had a bunch of parts of the book where you could write out all your thoughts and, really get into depth. And at the time I got the book, I was spending every February on the Lost Coast of California for the California State Park System. And so I was a volunteer. And so the whole month of February, um, I had plenty of time. I had chores to do there as a volunteer, but I had lots of spare time. So between hiking and tracking and practicing my skills, I would write and think about this, where I'm going to go. So one day, my sister Sandy showed up with a book from Tom Brown Jr., The Tracker, and it was his first book. And I read that and I was really disappointed because I figured Tom had long since passed away and that there was no place to learn these skills. When I was in my teens, I naturally was drawn to survival skills, primitive skills, First People skills, First Nation skills. Well, actually, long before that, but there was no one that I came across that taught this stuff. So when I read Tom's book, I immediately was engrossed and then saddened that there wasn't a place I could go learn this. And then I looked in the back of the book and he had a school in New Jersey. So Sandy had another book and I read that. And then it was I think the next summer I took off and did a class. I think it was in the fall, probably October of 91, maybe.
How old were you at that time?
It's probably 43. I was in my, 40s, early 40s. That kind of started that. Tom's class was really great. It was 20 people, 25 people. So it was kind of a small class for him. That's too big a class for me. I just work with small groups. But when I teach, one of the things that I learned in that class, well, there was two things that were pretty inspiring, was the bow drill friction fire, which is a way to make fire without matches or a lighter or those things that we're used to in modern life. And I always knew that worked because I remember as a little kid, I'd rub sticks together all the time because I'd heard that you could rub sticks together and make fire. But if it was funny, before I took his class, I had read skills books. He has several skills books that are pretty good. And I had learned how to make fire that way before I went to class. And I actually took off on a weekend I had backup matches just in case, but I went camping for a weekend on the coast in February, which is usually pretty stormy. And I my focus was just to make fire with the bow drill. So the first night I didn't get a fire for breakfast. Saturday morning, I got a fire with the bow drill kit. So that was pretty inspiring for me. And I think what it is that the detail it takes to be successful with making fire that way is broad. You have to know a lot. There's so much involved in just a simple thing as making fire. It's a very challenging technique.
So you hiked a group to California coast from Healdsburg, California, when you were 16 years old. I looked it up. That's 30 miles from the coast. And then you were also you were a horseback tourist guide in Banff, Canada. You were young when you did those, I believe. So why did you do those, and what did those experiences awaken in you? Were those the impetus for you to get a love of the outdoors?
Those were probably accumulation of my experiences and what I like to do. Our family we were very outdoor oriented. We had horses and we had some cows and chickens and dogs and cats and growing up. And we had some places that we grew up allowed us to really kind of wander around. And our parents would call us in for dinner, and then we go back out, depending on the time of year, and play until it was time to go to bed. So we were always out and about. We didn't have cell phones. All we had was landlines. And so I think you had a lot more freedom in a sense to be able to do a lot more stuff. We surfed in December, and my two older sisters and I, we would go and surf at the mouth of the Russian River in the wintertime when the waves are best. And we didn't have any wetsuits. And so, you shouldn't be out surfing at moonlight at night. No, I wouldn't recommend that now. So, yeah, I mean, I traveled, Sarah Finn, I went to Canada the first time I was 14 with my two older sisters, and we split up. My sister Sandy and I took off and hitchhiked all around BC and Alberta. We slept under bridges. We slept in churches. I don't believe we had a tent. We had friends the Napier Hemis in Vancouver, who had the Kasan Indian chiefs up on the Skeena River chief daughter would come down and go to school in Vancouver during the winter, and then they go back up. So we spent some time up in the Kispioks and the Kasan with the folks up there. We managed to get into Canada by having very little money. I think we told some stories about going to see the Bouchard Gardens or something.
So you go up there with you're 14, she's close to 18, for a summer to Canada. You were just roaming through that area, living out under bridges, camping, I assume, just because you wanted to go see that part of the country. What were you hoping to see or experience?
We grew up with all of this feeling of what's around the corner. So one of the things that was always just thrilling for me was driving from Sonoma County up to Yosemite to go for a week hiking or camping, or going up to Mount Shasta, up the long valley, up the Interstate 5, going up from Sonoma County up to Siskiyou County, where the mountain's standing out, 14,000 foot high, and it's like, it always just did something to us. But our dad worked all the time. So though we camped with my dad when we could, and he liked to do that. But my mom was really the instigator of play. My mom's, she'll be, let's see, I think she'll be 97 coming up pretty soon. She's doing great. So it was a way to kind of get away from that and look for a better life and to experience what that might be like. And so you had the freedom of, there's a book, a mountaineering book called Freedom of the Hills. So from that book and from training, I could take a rope and my clothes and a pack and maybe a few other little things, and I could take off and climb up on the ridges of the mountains and move that freedom of movement. So that's how I looked at myself. I sort of rejected the mainstream lifestyle. I didn't want a house in suburbia. I didn't want that debt. I didn't want some of those things that I saw my parents struggle through and other my friends' parents struggle through. So I think that that's probably, kind of what drove me.
It sounds like you grew up with a lot of freedom. It seems like your mom may have encouraged that. You grew up, I think, outside of Yosemite, is what I was reading. That part of California, you're outdoors a lot. It doesn't seem like you're afraid to be outdoors. You're not really. At least that's my takeaway from hearing you speak. And it almost seems like you feel at home when you talk about it. So you worked in the mill, right? I think you had a milling company. You go and do your training under Tom Brown Jr. You come back and you want to spend more time doing what you love. And in 1994, you founded Lifesong Wilderness Adventures. What was your original vision for Lifesong, and how has it evolved?
Yeah, well, that name of my company that I have and have kept, that was inspired from my experience at the tracker school with Tom Brown because of the nature of his training. Tom believed that it was really important to connect with your deeper self, to be aware of who you were and what motivated you, what drove you, a vision above and beyond yourself too. So he promoted on finding something greater than the self to work with and to make the world a better place. So it was pretty inspiring. One of the students at class, let's see, there in Monterey, California, there's a generating plant there in Moss Landing, and it's got a great big stack on it. And they've got filters in there to help reduce the smoke. And this fellow worked there. So hopefully I'm getting the story right. And he was so inspired by what Tom talked about that when he got home, he reduced the smoke and residue coming out of that stack by 30% or more. I can't remember the exact. But those are the kinds of things that happen with tracker students. Tom challenged you to find something and make the world better. So he believed make the world better for the children. It's really important to Tom and the environment. So he was a huge environmentalist in the sense of he understood our relationship to Mother Nature, which is without nature, we don't do very well. So he inspired a lot of people. He didn't want you to run off into the woods and, live in the woods and get away from society. He wanted you to stay in society and do the work. Keep your job, whatever that is. Don't quit your job, which most all the tracker students did. Everybody, you know, it was funny. They quit their jobs, ended their relationships, did this whole thing about themselves and then, came back around, right? From to back where they were sort of. Of course, that's not everybody, but he taught, thousands of students. Some of the classes I took with Tom had over 100 people in them, towards when I quit. That was 98, I think is the last time I went to class. But so that was so life song. What's your life song? What is your life song? And that's where that came from. Like I would challenge my students, with that, what is yours? And I would challenge myself with that. And so maybe being a little bit selfish, I decided that I would teach these skills and my giving back would be supporting, helping these people that came, pay their money to attend and help them work through whatever stuff that nature could help them with. So, I'm the teacher, but nature really is the teacher, right? So I'm sort of like, I'm the signpost. Don't follow me, but follow the sign, where are you going? What's in your heart and that kind of stuff. So,
Well, yeah, you say selfish, but I think it almost sounds like it was like a calling because you still do it and you enjoy it, and it's almost like you felt that calling from within and you wanted to have others experience what you perhaps experienced with Tom over there. So, I don't know, that's beautiful. Um, so now you start your company, you go out in the wilderness with people, you take adults, you take teens. When people come and wanna take your class, what are these people seeking? Do you have people from all I assume you have people from all walks of life, people that have corporate jobs, you have teachers, you probably have public servants, you have teens, parents perhaps want them to go on this educational trip. What are people seeking when they go on these endeavors with you?
Well, that's a really good question. We ask our students why they come when we get everybody in a circle and we kind of introduce ourselves and sort of ask why, without prying too deep. But people usually will express why they came. And a lot of it is just a deeper connection to nature. They want to reconnect, or maybe they have never done any camping at all, which is the case for a lot of students, both men and women. So I've worked really hard on making my business a safe space, right? So I work really hard on people trusting me so they can come and they can feel comfortable. They're not going to get bullied. They're not going to get picked on. The amount of women that come to my class now has gone up quite a bit over the last few years. I've been working on that for a long time to get um, women to feel comfortable. And I've noticed that a lot more women now are doing a lot of solo trekking. They're off on their own doing these incredible trekking and camping and all, you know. And so some of them want some skills, build up on that skill. And some of them have never camped, and the guys too. Some of them, they just never had that opportunity. Their parents were campers and they just never had the opportunity of growing up. And now they're, maybe mid 30s, 40s. They have professional jobs. Now they have a little bit of time. They can go and spend a week or a few days and add to their confidence.
Can you tell me about someone that has been transformed? Do you have an example of someone that was transformed from one of your classes?
Well, I have recently, last June, I had a group at First Circle, notably one who helps me as a volunteer now. Jared, he wrote me this long letter about his experience and how much it affected him and changed him in a positive way, and wonderful, right? Just wonderful. And another student, Mary, same. Just she sent me this meme a few weeks ago. It shows a grouse, a bird, with its feathers out like this, and all underneath her feathers are chicks, her chicks. And so she's protecting them, right? And so Mary's caption was, "This is how you make me feel," right? which is, you know, um, which is nice. Yeah, it's really nice because that's maybe not what I envision that I do, but it makes me feel like, well, she feels comfortable, right? And it makes her feel, it allows her to be herself. When you get a group of people that don't know each other, right? But a group of strangers together and they're spending, 4 nights or 5 nights with you and them, there's a period where people get comfortable with what's happening with each other. And I think to me, that's really the music, that's the kind of the joy to watch how that unfolds. There are parts of these skills that will test you deeply. You know, they can pull up stuff. out of our experience or our history, that can be uncomfortable.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, the bow drill is a perfect example. I always say that the bow drill is my greatest teacher because it's a challenging. This is fun, suffering here. So the men think because they're men, they should be able to do it, right? It's just inherently like, okay, fire maker. And the women, it's like, well, we're going to learn, we're going to take notes, and we're going to read about it, and we're going to, do this systematically, right? And so you have the guys and doing one way, and not all guys, but anyway, generally speaking. And sometimes they get so mad that they get so frustrated that they throw their whole kit, they'll throw it across the camp, and stomp off. Okay, well, that's fine to do that, right? So it's the bow drill's teaching, right? I'm just the facilitator. The bow drill is doing the work, right? It's doing the deep work. That's not what my school's about. My school's about you coming, having a good time, and learning skills. But this stuff happens. So it does happen, not a big deal, right? You're in a safe space. You're in a place that this can happen. And, as long as nobody's hurting anybody or any of that kind of stuff, then, it's a way to grow. It's a way to let go of stuff. So, yeah.
So let's talk about survival in the wilderness. Can you walk me through one of your courses? I was reading online. They have core priorities of survival, such as shelter, water, fire. And then I was reading online, there's something called the rule of threes, where, 3 minutes without air, you can die. 3 hours without shelter in bad weather can be fatal. 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food. Walk me through a big picture understanding of how someone can survive in the wild. What are the important principles of it?
Okay. So in my classes that I teach, the way I like to teach, I don't teach the rules of 3 or 5 or whatever, though I do have a level of importance that we want to consider. You want a small grouping of things to focus on because you want to, what was that other thing I was supposed to remember before I could survive? Right. You want it pretty simple, right? You're just going to meet your basic needs. So one of the reasons I don't do the rules of 3 is because if I tell you, Seraphin, if you don't eat, if you don't get your calories in 3 weeks, you're going to die. Well, you might just take that up here because I'm, who I am telling you, you're going to be dead in 3 weeks if you don't, get your 2000 calories going. Right. So psychologically, I just put something in your brain, right? Which you might take seriously or you might not. Right. So I don't say things like that. The record is over 100 days. You can do pretty well for a month without food. So you're not going to die. Food is unfortunately something we all really enjoy. And it's a bummer when you're hungry. And to go a long time like that, is pretty challenging. But the word is, hey, don't worry about food right now. We got other priorities. Water is huge, right? The clothes that you're wearing are the most important part initially. How are you dressed? Now, if you're hiking in the desert and you're going out for a day hike with some friends, a day hike in the desert could easily turn into a survival situation if you're not prepared because of the heat and the dehydration. So your clothing matters, and water matters, shelter matters, which is your clothing, right? Your hat, your big sombrero, right? Your big sun hat. There's a guy really wrote this really phenomenal book. His name is Gonzalez, and he wrote this book from his experience wearing shorts in Glacier National Park with his buddy, and the fog rolled in. They got off trail and got lost. He ended up writing this book called Deep Survival about why some people survive and why some people don't. I really recommend this book. It was written a number of years ago, but really Deep Survival. It's great. So my priorities are where your first level is shelter. And so what do you have on your person? And then hydration, right? Now, water is pretty serious. Our brain needs lots of water. And so we don't make good decisions when we're dehydrated. Lots of things can happen to us where things aren't working correctly. So those two things, shelter and water, are really important. Now, where does fire show up? Now, if you're up in the boreal, but way up north, way up in northern Canada, Siberia, Finland, Norway, all of that level, fire is always the first thing that people will tell you that you need to have, right? Because in the wintertime, because the cold is just a killer. I mean, it'll kill you quick if you're not dressed properly or if you don't have a way to stay warm. So your priorities really are based on at the moment, right? So if you're in the desert and you're getting overheated, what do? You find shelter, whatever shelter you can find. What happens if there's no shelter, Mark? Well, you better go find some shelter. You have to get out of the sun. What can you put on your head? Can you put your day pack on your head to cover? Sure. So it can be that simple, that basic. So, you don't want to be cavalier, right? Nature's a wonderful place, but it'll kill you. And there's a guy I never got to train with physical, but I train out of his book daily now. And I think I've had his book for over 10 years, Morris Kahansky, and he's out of Edmonton. He passed away last year, I believe. His thing was he would tell you that the bush is neutral. It neither cares for you or doesn't care for you. Your knowledge will provide for you, but nature's not going to hand it to you and say, oh, here's a tent. Here's a nice meal for you. No. So it's not for you or against you. It's neutral. And so you have to realize that you are responsible. You're responsible.
So you get people from all walks of life that come to your classes, some that don't have any experience, probably some that have some. What have you noticed people struggle with the most in your classes? I know you talked about the men and them wanting to, it sounds like, power through it to get it done. What do people struggle with the most?
Maybe just being comfortable camping, though a lot of my students are campers. So they've camped, have experience with that. There's really not a lot that they really, really struggle with other than the bow drill. And that's the big, big struggle. And getting used to knife work, carving. So what's great about that class is that it's an introductory to carving and using the knife safely and getting your knife skills in order, which are really important. So one of the things they have to do is I usually have people carve a walking stick first. So they will thin out some green, small trees and they get to peel the bark and then work that stick down. When you get into the more advanced programs like the Edge, then that's a psychological factor there, right? So you get some deep training for 3 days, and then you do a 24-hour overnight, and you just close on your back. And I give you some other things in a way to make fire and a way to put out fire. But usually I try to make it difficult as I can to make fire for you. So the challenge is. So psychologically, that can be difficult for people, just spending your night out alone. If you can make a fire, then you've got a companion, right? And so it's not so bad. But if you're unable to make fire and you're out without a fire, then that affects you differently. Years ago, we were doing the Edge, and we had a guy who was an active Air Force pilot, jet pilot. And he came to class and he said, I have some things that kind of scare me and I want to challenge myself with those. And he said, one of them is meeting a bear in the woods. And so I said, cool. I said, you probably will meet one in the woods here. So he was learning the technique for fire making using a block of magnesium and a flint striker. It's a kind of a common tool that is sold in a lot of stores. The reason I teach with that is because I don't really like it. It's not a very dependable thing. And so people struggle with it. So you have to practice with it a lot. And so he was doing really good. He's getting his fires and he was like, oh, this is just like Boy Scout stuff. No problem. So he goes out on his overnight. And as he's gathering his wood going up the trail, here comes a bear. So he runs face to face with this black bear. And the black bear turns around and runs away, which I told him, which was going to happen, right? If he saw a bear. So he got that. He was like, oh, I got my bear. And then he went to build his fire for the night, and it was not warm. It was not a warm night. And he couldn't get a fire going because his flint broke. And when he came back the next day, his hands were all chewed up from trying to get this thing to work. But he powered through all that and had a great experience. And that's kind of what that class is about, right? So it's to push that edge, push you a little bit beyond your comfort zone. And how do you respond to that? How do you respond and adhere to that when you're up against something like that?
I remember when I was growing up, I was in Boy Scouts, and we had to go and sleep by ourselves with a sleeping bag, no tent, overnight by ourselves. And it wasn't overly cold, but it was a cool night. This was in Texas. And I remember being so scared because you would hear wolves, or maybe they were coyotes. I think they're probably coyotes yelping. You heard animals. You heard the rustle of the grass, and you didn't know if that was an animal coming towards you. I mean, we have no bears down there. We don't even have wolves, but it took me, I think, 3 hours to fall asleep. And then when I fell asleep, I just knocked out and I wake up, just fine.
Yeah.
But I could see how it could be very, very scary, very challenging mentally to push yourself through the night. I remember they would put one scout here, then one scout. They were probably about 50 feet from each other, but you still felt alone, no fire. You're just sleeping under the stars.
Yeah, good. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. I don't know how many times growing up over the years that I would wake with a start. I did a lot of like throw my bag down camping. I had this one group of teens years ago where the whole transformation, I mean, they're already very athletic, hardworking, nice kids. And there was a series of logs that they had to cross over to get to another part of camp, which they named Cool Camp. So we had our base camp, and then there was Cool Camp, which was a meadow with big Jeffrey pines around it. So we would teach them how to go across the logs, supporting each other. We had these long poles, and they would all get on one end and hold the pole for the first person to go across the log, and by holding onto this pole. And then they would hold on to the other end, and the kids one by one would go over and then hold on to the other end. And they would do this through across, I think, 3 logs. And so they learned to work as a team. They learned to trust each other. So by the end of the program, these kids were running across those logs at night, carrying their sleeping bags, going over to Cool Camp to go sleep in the meadow under the stars, right? And so that transformation of, 3 weeks was just phenomenal. I patterned that program after my growing up, how I grew up, how I felt.
Let's say someone was to go outside, go into the wilderness. They already have their clothes, perhaps the appropriate clothes. If it's cold, they have that. If someone had only one tool, what would that tool be? Would it be something to light a fire? Would it be like a hatchet? Would it be a knife? A shovel? What do you think?
Those all sound great. I'll take all of them. So that's a really good question. Okay. So what is the hardest thing in your experience? What is the hardest thing to do without it. If you were off camping and you didn't have it.
So my inclination would be some sort of like hatchet or a knife, something where I can carve wood, something that I can turn wood into something functional, build shelter, um, create some way to make a fire. I would think that would be most important because I think that would be the hardest to try and mold wood or engineer wood with just my hands.
Yeah. So yeah, a knife is critical, very critical. What happens if you don't have a knife?
If there's no knife, maybe, I don't know, find a sharp rock or something like this.
Yeah. So you can, if you practice and you're very skilled at it, you can make a bow drill kit with a rock. When I was in Mississippi, I was chagrined to find out there was no rock.
Really?
Wow. There's probably rocks somewhere there, but where I was, I couldn't find any. There was no rock. Okay, so what else? What else can you think of that would be very difficult to duplicate? And that question of what would I bring with me, right?
Right.
And, and that
Well,
question of the more you know, the less you have to carry. But not suggesting not to carry these things, but just,
mhm.
you know, to answer your question.
What else would be difficult? I guess water sanitation
Yeah.
would be critical. So filtering water or boiling, because I assume if I have a knife, I can, and if I knew how to start a fire with that knife, then but having a fire, if I don't have a pot, how am I going to boil water? Let's say there's a stream. How can I boil that water? So that's the next
You
limitation.
said it. Yeah. So to answer your question would be, I would probably, based on my skill level and my knowledge, for myself, I would probably bring a container because that would make life way more easier. Right. Now, if I'm in a survival situation and I can't make a fire, I can't treat my water, am I going to drink water with the probably knowledge that I'm going to get sick or not drink water? So I'm going to drink water. I am not going to drink water. I have to have water. I cannot say, well, this water's probably got something in it that's going to make me get sick in a few days, so I'm not going to drink it. No, you have to drink it regardless. You have to, yeah, unless it's salt water, right, or something. And the idea is that you're going to be rescued within, 70 some hours, 3 days time, and then you can go get your penicillin and get that taken care of.
I had a question. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it. I'm sure you've heard of the Christopher McCandless. Back in 1992, he graduated college, cut ties, and hitchhiked to Alaska. He lived off the land and found an abandoned bus while he was there. He couldn't get back to civilization, though, because of the Teklanika River. When he passed it, it wasn't raging, and when he tried to return, it was. He lived for 113 days. Ultimately, he died. He was around 67 pounds when they found him. They wrote a book about him, Into the Wild, and there's some theories as to how he died. I don't know if you have any thoughts about. As I was sitting down thinking of interviewing you, I was like, what's a story I can bring forward to him and see if he has any thoughts about the situation. 67 pounds, it sounds like at least the person must have died of starvation, at least, because I mean, he wasn't getting enough calories. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I read the book. It's been many years since I read the book, and which kind of gave the backstory, of his life and things. So that was helpful to kind of understand. One of the interesting things about going without food for a long period of time is that it's sort of like people that are trying to lose weight and they go on a high protein diet. and it gets those ketones going, and you start shrinking your fat cells, right? Something I learned not too long ago is that you don't really lose fat cells; they just get fat cells. They get smaller. It's very interesting, like a balloon, right? So if you don't get enough calories, it is safer for you to fast than to take in calories that are below what you need. Isn't that fascinating? So you will die, you will break down, your body will break down quicker if you try to eat a 400 or 500 calorie day and not meet your 1,000, 1,200 calorie limit or minimum. So this is how I understand it. I have a couple of friends that are working in the medical field, and I've talked to them about this, what their take is on this. So it's kind of a specialized idea about going without food in survival. So, that's why food is the last. It's because you can go quite a long time without. You can break down quicker by eating less calories than your body needs. That's just really fascinating. So your body will do better if you fast. And so maybe, I remember in the book, he had shot a moose and he was trying to smoke the meat to preserve it. And most of it went bad. He couldn't get it. He was getting calories, but he wasn't. And moose meat or any wild game is very lean. It's super lean. You gotta eat the fat, right? You gotta eat the brain. And that's how people in the gold rush in Alaska and the Klondike, a lot of those people starved to death with a full belly. It's called rabbit starvation. Why did they starve to death? Because they didn't get enough calories off that lean rabbit. The hairs, they're very lean. Now, if they had eaten the brain and all those other yucky inner parts that we do not want to eat, the intestines, the kidney fat, all that stuff does have to be consumed at the same time.
So like the Indians, when they would hunt buffalo, they had to eat the entire animal. That's where they had most of the sustenance? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Because we need protein, we need fat, and the brain needs lots of fat to survive, as I understand it. I'm not a doctor, but from what I've read. So yeah, so if you're going to try to live on rabbits, you got to eat the rabbit, right? Not just the meat. And that's why these guys would die. I mean, they'd be full bellies of rabbit, and they would die of starvation. Die of starvation. That's wow. So you think about, well, I'm going to go to Alaska, and I'm going to go out in the wilds. I'm going to shoot me a caribou or something, and I'm going to, drink a little bit of pine needle tea and live off that caribou. Well, you can, but you got to eat the caribou, not just the choice piece. You got to eat everything you can. The bone, the marrow, full of nutrition, full of fat, right? Oils. One of the things that's really fascinating is the coastal Indians in the Northwest. They made ooligan, pronouncing it correctly, ooligan oil. So ooligan oil has all the omega-3s and the good things that supply us with so many fats and nutrients. So, and they would like ferment it. I can't imagine what it tastes like.
What is ooligan? I'm not familiar. What is ooligan?
It's like oil from the ooligan fish, which is a small sardine or a herring. And so they would ferment it, and they would get the oil out of it, and they would add this to all their food. So you'd always have ooligan grease, ooligan oil to go with whatever food you were eating, and that's the fat. That's what you're getting. If they didn't have that, then life would have been much harder for them.
I have some kind of a silly question in a way, but still wanted to ask you. So, talking about you yourself and your experience, let's say there was like an EMP, which is it's like a bomb that fries everything electrically, right? So, like the grid goes down, and society it doesn't function like it does right now. You know, the grocery store's not going to have all its food. Everything kind of slows down, and we have to go live off the land. Let's say you have to go live off the land. So, what would your survival plan be? Do you have a survival plan? And if so, what would that be? What would that look like?
It's kind of funny you should say that because over the last few days we've been talking about stocking up on some extra bulk foods like beans and some grains, those kinds of things. I'm going to kind of switch this just a little bit, go back to we were talking about foods. So this is something that I would consider doing is there's a food called pemmican. Now, how do you store meat protein over a long period of time if you can't freeze it or dry it? Well, smoking only is a short term, my experience. I mean, jerky is not sugary thing. Jerky is dry, bone dry. That powder, you grind it up into a powder. It's dry, and that will preserve as long as it doesn't get wet. So there's a food called pemmican, and it's 50% fat and 50% protein. Lean protein is best. And the fat, which is very important, is rendered. So like bacon, you're cooking your bacon, and then that fat that comes off the bacon, that's rendered. And the very white fat, you can take like a fatty piece of meat and put it in your slow cooker all day, and it'll separate. And that clear fat is rendered. So what's interesting about pemmican is that you can make it. You can buy rendered fat at the store, and you can buy some bison if you want. You can do it with beef, but use the leanest cut you can get. So what I've done is I bought some bison, some buffalo, and I cut it really thin and dried it in my dehydrator. And then I ground it up into a meal. I mean, very fine. And then I added, 50% or half volume of rendered fat and mix that all together and put it in a patty and let it sit. If it's kept dry and in a good container, it'll last forever. I mean, it's documented over 50 years.
50 years? Really?
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a friend of mine I know professionally who was on that show you were talking about. And she's done it twice, and she won the last time she was there. And that's one of the things that she took with her was pemmican. And that sustained her, even though she just had a little bit of it. But the way she talked about how it was just like she could feel the energy from that food when she would nibble on it, right? So the Métis people, the French that came into Quebec and to Florida and Louisiana through there, I guess, the Métis people were French and Native American women. So French men, basically Native American women, and then they hunted the bison and they made this pemmican. And pemmican with the Hudson Bay Company, which was, out of Britain, out of England, the big trapping company, that became their money. So this pemmican became money. And so that's what they paid their trappers with in the winter, because they would get through the winter on living just on pemmican. You can live just on pemmican, but you got to have that fat, the rendered fat. If you don't render your fat, then it'll kill you, apparently. Important to render it. And your protein. And so it's a lean protein, right? So you don't want a big marbled, beef steak. You want the round cut. I try not to use beef just because there's so much fat in most of the beef. I try to use, bison and stuff like that. So I'm gathering up my beans and some rice and some bulk foods like that we can have a lot of food value, easy to store. What about meat, right? So if power goes out, what am I going to do with the freezer that's got all the meat in it? So could I put up, 20 pounds of pemmican for an emergency? And if I could keep it carefully dry, and that's what they would do. They would make these boxes, the Plains people, Lakota and Cheyenne, those folks would make these boxes out of rawhide from the bison, beautiful boxes. They would fill those boxes full of pemmican and store them. Some people, I know I have some friends over the years, and other people will say, well, I'm going to go out, 5 miles, and I'm going to dig a hole in the ground, and I'm going to put my food stash in there and a few other things, clothing, whatever other things, tent stuff, as my getaway. And then, maybe another 10 miles and so on until they get to where they want to go. And they have these food stashes. Not a bad idea. You know, if you live in an environment where you think that like a big earthquake in San Francisco could really cause a lot of problems, tsunami on the coast here in Oregon, right? So there's lots of different scenarios. My take on all of that kind of stuff is I have found that in our country that when these things happen, like when we have weather events, floods, tornadoes, earthquakes, people come together and help their neighbor. So that's kind of where I'm at. That's what I think will happen. So I know how difficult. So I'll be 73 here this year. And so I know my physical limitations of what I would really be capable of doing. I'm not going to be able to outrun anything, but I could probably make do for a while and get a chance to challenge myself.
Yeah. Yeah, you could probably do better than 99.9% of us, I'm sure. So you've taught a lot of people in your courses. It sounds like you're very passionate about it. So people, when they leave your course, what do you hope they take home with them? How do you hope they have changed? Or what do you hope that they took with them as they go back home after completing one of your courses?
I think it's that respect for nature and that they have experienced so many cool things about the natural world that they want to care for it. So one of the things that I think about is, if you learn to use something or work with something, you tend to care about it. So for instance, if you're learning about willow likes to grow with its feet in the water. So that means wetlands, that means creeks and rivers. So if you care about that willow, maybe you'll care about the wetland. Maybe you'll care about the animals that live there, the systems that live there that are that system, rivers, water, salmon, birds, all these things. So in my end is here's a plant that, oh, I can eat this plant. Oh, it has lots of nutrients. Oh, and I can pull these fibers off the outer bark of it. And now I have the string I can twist into a cord. I can twist into a rope. I can twist into a bowstring for my bow drill, or I can be a decorative, or I can use it to sew with. So it's sort of that understanding of these gifts that are there with our knowledge that we can take advantage of and also understand their place in the world. And that, not everything has use for humans. Not everything does. Not all plants do. And that's good to know that too, is that, we're not exactly, everything in the world we live in. There's other things, and not everything is made for our use. And I think it's important to understand that, but it's that connection, right? So I'm really happy when people make that connection. And some people immediately want to go out and teach it. So, we always like to say is that learn first, get your skills down, and go teach the kids, go teach your family, and start with that. So I think it's a way of passing on those things that you experience during class that really excite you.
Yeah, I'm sure that, you can teach them and they're going to learn something new, but I'll bet you spending some time out there in the wild, under the stars, amongst the trees, there's something like you said earlier, that nature does to us that changes us and embeds itself within us, that peace in a way. At least that's been my experience when I go out into the wilderness, to these national parks, spending time out there. It just makes you more at ease, at peace, at having this connection to something greater than ourselves. Let's say someone is listening and they want to get outdoors. Perhaps they want to learn more about wilderness survival. They can take a class, right? There's probably videos online that they can look at. How would someone go about what would you recommend someone do if they want to dip their toes into this field? Maybe they want to learn more about it. They want to go get more connected to nature. What advice would you have for them?
There's a lot of books out there. I'm a big believer in reading, and it can be, from inspirational book of people's experiences outdoors to maybe strategic books like How to Survive in the Wilderness, Tom Brown's book. It's really a fun way to kind of introduce yourself. So having a guidebook to help you along, I think is much better than videos. When you know what you're really looking at, you're trying to learn a skill or something, then there's probably, a lot of videos out there for that. Stories is how we learn, right? Stories. So videos are stories, books are stories, chatting with people, stories. So we learn from stories. And I think that's kind of why books can be really fun to start with, because they, the author leads you through their experience and these kinds of things that had happened. So with me, when I started rock climbing, I was kind of introduced to it by a friend. And then that was it for me. I was like, okay, I'm going rock climbing now. And that went on for many years of my life. So I did a lot of, and then we graduated to mountaineering. When I did that, when I took that group of adults from Healdsburg over to the coast to cruise Rhododendron State Park, I started by reading about the local native people and their trails that went from the valley to the coast. And that's how that started. And so I thought, whoa, I wonder if I could find those trails. And so that's how that kind of started. And I went out and looking for trails. And I really didn't use a map. I knew where the ocean was because I'd been out there lots of times and I knew my position in the world. And a map would have been really helpful. I think the last time I did that, I had a map with me, but you're going through different, you need several maps because of the distance usually. So readings, go to the library, ask the librarian, like, got any good, outdoor adventure stories? Hatchet for the kids, right? Hatchet was really popular. I'd never read it. I read it, I think, 10 years ago finally, but a lot of my teen students would come and they came because of the book Hatchet. A note on that, like hiking is a great way to start. If you want to hike with some people, there's lots of hiking clubs and you'd be surprised about how many people are out doing that. I think there's also the ethics, which is really important. So if everybody went out in the woods and took trees down and took boughs down for their beds and their shelters and everything, we would totally tear up the forest and everything. So there's you have to think about that, right? So what is your impact in an area? As a general rule, we just use dead and down material for our shelters and things like that. And rarely do we use green material, boughs and that kind of stuff. I'm lucky enough to be running out of an area that has this overstock with young conifer. And these too many stems per foot. And so we can thin those. So we're helping, right? It allows the trees to grow faster and we reduce the fire load. So we can go in there and we can do a good thing to the forest while we're using some of those green materials. Yeah. So thinking about the ethics, if you're going to collect plants for crafts or you're going to collect edibles, you don't take more than a third of what's there and only pick the healthy. There's things that you want to learn about. So the ethics are really, really important. And a lot of people, I don't know if that shouldn't say a lot, but some people never really had that ethics training. And so you'll see people online that are doing these shelters and stuff, and they haven't made that connection yet, the ethics of that. But if you look at any of the major schools that teach survival or adventures or things, and they'll have ethics in there about, they teach that stuff. You do have to be considerate of, the plant kingdom and wildlife. Very, very important.
So, last question. So, you're in your early 40s, you start Lifesong Wilderness Adventures with the hope and the desire of bringing people more in tune with nature, perhaps learning something about themselves. You being a teacher and teaching them some things that they probably didn't know and maybe learn something about themselves along the way. How do you feel it went? How do you feel it's going over these past 30 years?
Well, every day is a new day with it. And I have my hope that people will sign up for my programs, but they will come. So my shingle's out, and every year's different. And some years I have more students, and other years, I've made myself available. Sort of behind the scenes, there's a lot of work that goes into my schedule. Like over the years, I've scheduled a year ahead, right? So if I have a class offered in May and I run that class, and then I'll schedule it for the following May. And sometimes there's things that happen that I'm not always able to do that. Like this year my schedule was up late, and much later than I normally would like to do, because it gives people an opportunity to plan their programs. So I try to get an idea of what people are interested in. Like this year, I'm running a 4-night, essentially a 5-day tracking introduction to animal tracking, which is, we haven't really talked about animal tracking, but briefly, I did a 3-day intro with some of my students that have come to my class before. And we spent a good time on the trail looking at cougar sign, and which is very exciting, right? And so I can show them, look, the cougar was here, the cougar did this, because of my experience. And so now they have a visual, they can measure it and they can note it. And now they can walk through the woods and they see that track or trail sign, then they know what that is. And so when you're learning this stuff, not only you're learning the plants and the trees, but you're also learning about the wildlife. So visually, and you get to hear, bear sign. Bear sign's really fun. We track bear by scent often, which is really fun. That's pretty exciting for people when they have smelt that maybe before, but didn't really make that connection. And then so you can connect that. And I had that happen to some of my students. They wrote me a note about, yeah, we smelled it. We went looking, we found the bear bed, we found the scat, and they were just so excited. And so that, having that experience and having that knowledge, right? Not all animals, for me, my experience is you can scent them that well. Some animals are like elk are pretty easy to. Cougars are a little bit difficult to smell. But
You're telling me you can smell that these animals have similar smells. Like you can, like a bear, like bears have a similar scent as cougars, and that you can smell it.
well, not similar. No, they're unique. They're unique to themselves. Yeah.
They're unique to like bears. They're unique to cougars. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and they'll be different. So where I'm at in Oregon right now in the Cascades, in the foothills of the Cascades, the bears smell a little bit different than the bears do in the Klamath Mountain bears. when I go to a new area, you're kind of, and that's what I did. Immediately went out. Well, where's the bears? I know there's bears around here. Where are they? They got to be close by. I mean, I know where the bears are. They're less than a half a mile away, right? And so the first thing I did, we moved up here. I went looking for bears, and I found their sign before I found their smell. But oftentimes I'll be hiking in the woods and I'll get a whiff and I'll go, all right, there's a bear around here somewhere. So one time we did a really fun thing. I had a contract with the California Conservation Corps, which is trail builders. I went to 6 different wilderness camps and gave them a day of survival training. So I got to go from like the mid Sierras all the way up to Northern California. Really fun. And this one camp in the salmon wilderness area of the Northern California. As soon as I got out of the truck and parked it, I got a whiff of bear. I said, "Oh, you guys have a bear here?" And no, we don't have a bear. And so this happened on 2 different camps. And so after we got settled in and everything, I said, I want to show you something. And my assistant had found the bear trail with scat and everything. So fresh scat and all that. So we got to show them like, okay, well here, right? We smelled it. Here's the proof, right? So to have that kind of knowledge and experience is really fun. And I think, so Tom instilled that in me, right? Tom Brown, totally did that. He was so into it that, he just, zapped you with it. And so, but you have to, you train really hard. You can't let it just go away. You have to train, all this stuff, right? I have to relearn everything every year, it seems like. So I've forgotten most stuff that I've learned now, but it's the tracking, that is, really brings you into being part of the world around you, because it just allows you, whether you're bird watching, that's tracking. We all track, where did I leave my car keys? Right. Where's my wallet? What did what did the kids do with it? Whatever, right? You're always tracking stuff. So it's inherently in the human experience. All we're doing is we're just kind of slowing down, narrowing it down and saying, okay, this is what it's abstract. You rarely see a full print in detail, right? Rarely. So you see partial prints or you see evidence of. So there's measuring, there's, and it's sort of like the Sherlock Holmes, right? It's really about the facts, only the facts. And so you find yourself guessing a lot and maybe saying, well, maybe it's this. When you first learn, your brain will say, oh, look at that elephant print. Oh, crocodile went by here, just by the shapes of the dirt and stuff. And so you're building new things, synapses in your brain once you kind of get through that, because your brain wants to give you the answer. So you ask the question and your brain goes, oh, well, I can answer that. That's a big buck print. And of course it's not, something else or nothing. So there's that process you go through. And I went through that process and years ago. And so still you're looking, you're using your evidence, you're using your experience, and you're looking at something and going, well, it could be this, could be not, maybe not, right? So that's what's really fun about it.
So it sounds like it's a whole nother set of skills besides surviving is tracking. It's like a whole nother book, completely different with maybe some overlap, but that's what it sounds like for tracking. Whenever people talk about tracking, I picture looking at tracks on the ground and just following them. Maybe a twig's broken, but I've never heard about having the smell or being able to smell the animal. I didn't think our smell was that good.
When I remember like in 4th grade, maybe 5th grade, my teacher told me that modern humans have lost their olfactory ability. to smell like our ancestors did. And that stuck with me, you know, and I didn't even think to question people that smell perfume or wine or all these other things where we use not only our taste buds, but our sense of smell. And so when if I go back and say, hey, Seraphin, you're going to die in 2 days if you don't drink some water. It's like her telling me I've lost my ability to smell when I was in 5th grade or 4th grade. I know that now that's not true, right? Like you can develop that sense of smell. And yes, you can live longer than 2 days, right? So it's kind of that careful what we put in your head, right? And at the same time, that we are more capable than we think we are.
All right. So, Mark, if someone wants to take your course or find out more about you, how can they go about doing that?
Okay, great. Well, we'd love to have you come to camp. So, my website address is lifesongadventures.com, lifesongadventures.com. Or you can also type in Oregon Survival School. Oregon Survival School, that's me too. I'm registered with the state of Oregon. I'm a real business. I like to think a professional business. So, you know, when you come to camp, you'll come in a professional manner. Yeah, online. And then I have a contact page where it says on the website, it says contact us, and you can send me a email and ask me any questions. That's the best way for me. I prefer the email, or you can call me. There's my phone numbers on the contact page too. And at the bottom of my website, there's my mailing information and phone number and email.
Great, Mark. I'll put that information down in the show notes. So, thank you so much for being with me today. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate all you do. Think I'm going to try and get out and get some nature in me here pretty soon.
Oh, great. All right. Well, it was a pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Have a good day.
Okay, you too.